Coming up on today's Locked On Senators, we welcome back recurring guest Scott Wheeler to talk all about the Senators prospect pool.
In his most recent article in The Athletic, Scott ranked the Ottawa Senators prospect pool as 31st out of 32nd. And normally, Ross, we like to get mad at lists, but this time we can't get that upset.
We'll get into all that with him and more on today's edition of the Locked On Senators podcast. It's your team every day.
Your Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
I'm Jake Sanderson, and you're listening to Locked On Senators podcast.
I'm Tim Stützle, and you're listening to the Locked On Senators podcast.
Welcome inside episode 973 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm Ross Levitt, and on the outskirts of enemy territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, alongside Brandon Pillar up in the Blue Mountains. You can follow the show on social media. We're at Sens Central on Twitter, LockedOn.Senators on Instagram. The show is free and available on all podcast platforms, including on YouTube, where a like, comment, and subscription go a long way to helping the show grow. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Today is Friday, February 2nd, and Pilsy, I already miss Sens hockey.
I know, it's been too long. We're 6-2-2 in our last 10. Don't stop the Sens while they're hot. Unfortunately, the NHL had other ideas, and I'm sure there's probably Oilers fans being like, guys, we're on a massive winning streak. We don't want it to stop either. I don't think really anyone wants the NHL to take a break here, but the All-Star break, it's good, gets players, they can take a mid-season vacation. It's good for the kids. It's good for the sponsors, so it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine. We're doing just fine. The Senators finished January with a 6-7-2 record. But then you think about it, they lost their first 5 games. So things were looking up. But they were so busy in the month, right? 15 games in the last 31 days. 30 really, because they didn't play on the first. So it was just such a rhythm we got into. Postcast, podcast, and all the great things that happen in our lives between shows, if you can believe it. Yeah. But no, it's going to be great to get this rest for the team. We still don't have an update on Jake Sanderson. That's something I don't think will come until next Thursday. Now, with Jake Sanderson's name coming up, though, Pilsy, we have to really preface this conversation with Scott Wheeler under the terms that, well, Jake Sanderson, Ridley Gregg, Shane Pinto, and Tim Stützle, ever heard of them? They're all qualified for this based on age. This is the prospect pool as a whole. And we should also note that he has a cutoff of under 23. So Igor Sokolov and Angus Crookshank, although they could still be considered prospects, they do not count in Scott's ranking.
Yeah, I think I speak for Scott on this one. I would implore everyone to read the parameters of how he does the prospect pool before you read the list and you get mad. Just quickly take a look at what he's dealing with and where he set kind of the cap. And he does mention that he does kind of have to make some executive decisions on, okay, is this guy graduated to the NHL or is he still kind of back and forth? So there is some discrepancy there. But Ross, we read this article before we had Scott on, obviously, and maybe you could flip a couple guys here and there, but for the most part, at least in my opinion, he was pretty bang on with the rankings here for the Sens.
So we get into that, and we've actually got the banner on the bottom that shows what order he ranked these prospects. And keep that in mind, because next week on Locked On Senators, we're going to do our updated prospect pool rankings. Pilsy, we haven't done this since last May. So we'll pull up last May's and then pull up this one, and we'll talk about the guys who have graduated and who ranks where. So all that great conversation is coming up. We go half an hour with Scott Wheeler. So let's get to that right now. You're listening to Locked On Senators, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Guys, FanDuel is the official online sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, and it's America's #1 sportsbook. Get ready for Super Bowl. If you're like me, Super Bowl, you got to find a good spot on the couch. You got to have your snacks, your refreshments ready, and you got to have your bets in place. You don't want to be scrambling until it's too late. And with FanDuel, there's so many ways for you to end the season with a victory. Not only can you bet on who's simply going to win Super Bowl 58, you got to have that in place. And a key thing, Ross, I don't know if you do this as well, but if you're watching with a group, which most times Super Bowl you are, you got to at least be riding on the same team. You have to have the discussion as a group. All right, who are we riding? And then you mix in a couple prop bets that everybody likes to get hot. And that's how you have to have your squad ready for the Super Bowl. One of my favorite props about the Super Bowl, I actually just went and bet it on FanDuel today, the coin toss. Ross, are you a heads or a tails guy on the coin toss? Oh, heads. I'm a tails. Tails never fails.
You got a coin on you right now? I don't.
I do.
Nice. Okay, flip it. Shout out FanDuel.
Heads?
Yeah, I'm going heads. No,
there's the loon. It's tails.
No, that looks like there's a head on that side, though. You saying loons don't have heads?
I don't know if Queen Elizabeth
we don't want to see her tail.
Yeah, unconfirmed. But those are all the fun things you can bet on. You can bet on, will Usher debut a new song at halftime? Will will either quarterback catch their own pass at plus 5,000? That's a wild one. So don't miss out. New customers join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Today's episode is also brought to you by the GLEBE Central Pub. Let's give it up for the GLEBE Central Pub, right in the heart of the Glebe, 779 Bank Street. And when you head to the GLEBE Central Pub, you're guaranteed good vibes. You're going to get good food. You have awesome drinks. The specials are ridiculous. Go check them out on Instagram, GLEBE Central Pub, to check out all the great specials they have and events that are coming up at the GLEBE Central Pub. I'm talking live music every Saturday in the month of February. I know February is a dark time. It's a short month, but it's a dark, not a whole lot of sunlight, but why not add some to your life by going to check out live music every Saturday at the GLEBE Central Pub. They've also got the Sens Shuttle for only $17 round trip to and from the CTC. You can go to their website, GLEBECentralPub.com, and grab your tickets. Now, they also sell game tickets. There's a link for that. But if you scroll down, you can go and check out each game. $17 for the game on February 10th against the Leafs, then again on February 15th against the Ducks. So go check it out and then support local, support the pod, and leave your keys at home and let Sue do all the work. She gets you to and from the CTC. You leave an hour and 15 minutes before the game from the pub, and then you get dropped off right back afterwards. It's so easy to go into the game knowing that Sue will be right where she dropped you off when you are done. So go check them out today, guys. The GLEBE Central Pub, 779 Bank Street, and let them know that Locked On Senators sent you. All right, we now welcome on a Mount Rushmore guest of Locked On Senators. This is his 8th visit, and it's been 3 years and 4 months.
5, 6, 7, 8.
Yes. That's about as many spots as you moved Tim Stützle up in your redraft. Scott Wheeler's with us from The Athletic. And look, who would have thought that we could have bridged the gap this suddenly? It's been a roller coaster ride with Scott's work with The Athletic. We love the in-depth process that he takes us through with not only the prospect pool rankings, but with his draft coverage. And funny enough, Scott, I was looking back. Your first time on the show was September of 2020. Yeah, during that time.
Yeah,
but on that note, Scott, we were doing our draft rankings for 2020 then, and we had 47th Tyler Kleven on that same episode that we had you on, and now he's the Senators' top prospect as you put out your reports, 31st out of 32 teams. Before we get into that, though, how are you? You were at World Juniors. You're all over the place, man. What's going on?
Yeah, January was a busy month. January is always a crazy month. You've got the World Juniors, you've got the CHL and USHL top prospects game, which this year were in Moncton and in Plymouth. So you get back from the World Juniors, you got a couple days at home with the kids. I start immediately turning the page to the pool rankings and building out all the lists. And I've got to send the ranking to my editor and all of that. And then it's right into trying to write 32 pieces of content basically for the rollout of the pool rankings. Plus I do my mid-season list for each draft around this time. So this is it's sort of ranking central. I think I've talked with you guys about it before, but this is kind of a grind. I love the scouting part of my job. I love it. But this is, I really enjoy the storytelling and getting out into rinks and chatting with people and getting to know these kids as well. And you don't get to do that. I don't get to do that in January and February because it's just ranking after ranking after ranking. So looking forward to getting through the pool rankings. There's something I'm very proud of, but looking forward to getting through them so that I can get into the fun stuff, which will be the spring, right? With the Mem Cup, the Frozen Four, U18 Worlds, the Combine. That's a lot more fun for me to get out there and see these kids play and talk with folks about them and get to know them personally and all that. So the rankings is just a lot of typing and a lot of video and a lot of phone calls to sources, and it takes its toll, if you will. So
yeah, I can imagine doing rankings for all 32 teams. Now, you didn't make Sens fans wait too long in anticipation and suspense. Usually when this starts, Scott, Sens fans are like, okay, he's got this team here. That means the Sens should be in this area. And then we start guessing closer and closer as it dwindles down. But the Ottawa Senators, according to Scott Wheeler, have the 31st ranked prospect pool. My first question is, was there any consideration that they could have been 32nd out of 32nd? Or did you say, you know what, I hear it enough from Sens fans. The least I'm going to do, I'll bump them up one spot here.
Well, I try not to build my list that way to cater to the sensitivities of Sens fans. But no, there was honestly, there was consideration. I think if you look at if you read through the Islanders pool yesterday and you read through the Sens pool today and you read through the 15 reports for each, you'll probably end up at about the same spot. It's probably a coin flip between the two groups on the whole. If they were to sort of swap them, I think you're probably in about the same spot in terms of a lot of sort of B- guys, C+ guys, right? There isn't that sort of premium quality player. At the top of their pool, I had Calle Odelius, who projects to be a third pairing guy. And at the top of the Sens pool, you've got Tyler Clevin, who's probably about the same, right? So those are players, whether it's Calle Odelius or Matthew Maggio or Simon Holmstrom for the Islanders, who's actually having a good rookie season in the NHL and is a solid penalty killer in the NHL, or it's Tyler Clevin and Stephen Holiday and Oscar Pedersen, and you go down the list, obviously Boucher and Ostapchuk and those guys. They're all guys that you're hoping will play for you. They're not necessarily guys that you're expecting to be impact needle movers, right? So that's where their pool is at now. They've graduated the needle movers. They've graduated Sanderson and Stützle and even Ridley Gregg and Shane Pinto. And what's left especially after not making a first round pick last year, is you're missing the premium guys. Like Tyler Clevin would be a 5 to 10 ranked guy in a good pool, right? So they're missing those sort of top 2 or 3 prospects that most teams around the league have in their pools.
And that's back-to-back years without a first-round pick. And last year at the draft, we were just twiddling our thumbs, waiting. No first, no second, no third. You're just waiting. And then ultimately, they take a guy in Hoyt Stanley, who they drafted lower than where you had him on your rankings last year. And I just want to commend you as well, because 32, I mean, you talk about it's a bit monotonous and going through and grinding out through the video. I did a quick word count on this one. 4,200 words written on the Senators prospect pool in depth. And then Scott's work goes well beyond that. The Shane Pinto analysis you did a couple of years ago, where you're really breaking down the intricacies of his game. Heck, the first time we ever had you on the show, Scott, we were talking about a 2017 retrospective that you did on Erik Karlsson's playoff run. So clearly the in-depth knowledge is there for you. And I appreciate that some Sens fans would actually like what you said about Tyler Clevin, because you hope he becomes a low event defense first penalty killer who can pair beside a modern type. And that's been something that's been killing the Senators this year. They don't have those guys who put out fires per se. So I think that in terms of filling out the roster is what they need, because they've got guys in certain positions. You're not looking for necessarily a top line center. You're hoping Stützle's that, and you're hoping guys are already filled in that. So out of the players that you have ranked for Ottawa, who to you has the most certainty of playing NHL games? Because I know that you look a lot more towards the upside of the player when you're doing these rankings. Is there a player where, if you're making a bet of who plays the most NHL games, that you'd lean towards?
I think it's still probably Clevin. I know that's a pretty sort of simple answer after we've already talked about him, but you look further down the list. Is Tyler Boucher going to make it? I think it's anybody's guess at this point. He's shown some positive signs despite the production not being there. I've actually liked a couple of my last recent viewings. I don't know if I just got him on good days, but when I watched Boucher, for example, recently, I thought he looked like himself. He looked involved, finishing his checks, getting open in the slot for a shot, lurking around rebounds. That's all positive, and that's his game. As long as he can keep pace, I think Boucher's got a chance to make it. Obviously, I mean, we don't need to talk about top 10 pick and all that at this point. He's not going to live up to that. But if he can be a guy that he could play some games, I think there's still a chance that Zach Ostapchuk could become a good fourth liner in the NHL. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities for him. So there are some guys there. I think Holiday's, and we can talk about, I'd like to talk about Holiday in depth. Holiday's maybe the wild card. I think Holiday maybe, if he does hit, probably has a little bit more upside than the guys like Boucher and Ostapchuk that are probably just going to fill in around the edges of a roster. You might get something a little bit more out of Holiday. But in terms of game, if we're talking just projectable games played, I think Clevin's probably going to play the most games. I expect that Clevin will become an everyday top 6 guy. I don't know whether he's going to be playing 20 minutes rather than 17 minutes, but if he can play 15 minutes at even strength and a couple minutes on the PK, that's still a useful piece considering how big and strong he is and just the different look that he also gives a D pairing. So Clevin's probably still my answer there.
Yeah, I think most Sens fans would agree with you there, Scott. Now, someone who is likely going to play, or at least has already played a decent amount of NHL games that's high on your list as well. Number 2, Mads Søgaard. And then you've got Levi Merilainen at 6 for the Sens. How do you evaluate goalies that are still prospects, but have had at least experience in the NHL? Like, do you look at that NHL experience, and does that kind of give them an extra boost that at least they've had a taste of the pros? Or do you mostly focus on, okay, these are still young goalies, how are they doing up against their peers in, you know, the AHLs or wherever they're playing? Like, I'm just curious how you kind of evaluate between NHLs maybe overachieving, or Mads Søgaard kind of being there out of necessity versus where they should be in their development.
Yeah, I think in Søgaard's case specifically, I'll get into the general sense, but in Søgaard's case specifically, if anything, if you're doing an honest evaluation of his play, you're probably sort of devaluing the way that he's played in the NHL. I think it's been a bit of a struggle for him. He hasn't quite looked up to the level yet. So it almost becomes a negative. But then you mentioned, and I think you rightly mentioned, that maybe he shouldn't be there at this point in his career. And I think when you're that big, it always takes time. I think the issues that we've seen with him in the NHL have been the issues that we often see with really, really tall goalies, which is shots surprisingly sneaking through, which is not being set for shots because his movement from A to B isn't as smooth and compact. He doesn't stop on his edges quite like some smaller goalies do. So sort of overplaying lines, pulling himself off of his line because he's so big. I think it can be actually harder to find your lines in the net when you're that size. So those are some real issues that he's run into. But I think when you're that big, you always have to give it time. Like I'd like to see them stick with him until he's 25, 26 years old and then see what you have. And I know that's hard to do if you're constantly a good goalie in the AHL who doesn't perform well in the NHL. Eventually, coaches like to write those kinds of guys off after years and years and years of the same story. I do think in Søgaard's case, there are some tools there, and he's made a lot of progress even since he was drafted. I was higher on him than where they took him, or about right where they took him when they picked him. He was one of my favorite.
They traded
goalies.
up to get him, so they were high on him as well.
Yeah, he was one of my favorite goalies in that draft. With Merilainen, I was as we've talked about on the show in the past, I was a little bit at the other end. Love Merilainen's one-on-one game, his feet. He's a tremendous shootout goalie, breakaways, that kind of thing. He sticks with shooters, really, really mobile and kind of bouncy on his feet. which makes him great one-on-one. I don't think in terms of the rest of the game that he's necessarily going to have the upside that a goalie like Søgaard could have if Søgaard figures it out and puts the pieces together. But in both guys, you're hoping for organizational depth. Like you're hoping, obviously, ideally that they can be a backup. And if they can't be a backup, that they're a solid number 3 if you need to call on them. You're not going to get a starter out of either one of those guys, I don't think. And I like Søgaard to get there eventually. Like I still believe that Søgaard's got an opportunity to be a backup in the NHL. So I'm not quite ready to rule him out, even if it has been a little tough for him in the NHL starts that he has gotten.
Hope you're enjoying our conversation with Scott. We'll get right back to it. But first, a word from our friends with Mary J's.
Yes, Mary J's dispensary in Ottawa. Mary J started off 3 best friends deciding they wanted to go for their dreams, and they worked hard and they've done it. They now have 4 stores in the Ottawa area. The Ottawa locations are Riverside South, Orleans, Greeley, and Russell. So if you're in those areas, you know that you've got a Mary J's that can hook you up. Mary J's offers the absolute best and newest products in the market, and they're adding new fun stuff to the menu every single week. So whether you're a rookie and you're looking to try different things, they can help you out there, or you're a grizzled vet and you already know your order and you want to be in and out of there in no time, they got you covered. Mary J's offers competitive pricing. In fact, they will price match any store in Ottawa. No matter where you go in Ottawa, they will price match. So that's guaranteed you're going to get the best price around at Mary J's. And sure, great products, great prices, that's important, but you got to have good service. And that's what Mary J's does. They got friendly bud tenders who are always ready to assist. In fact, one of the owners, Dashi, diehard Sens fan, absolute beauty. You can usually find him at one of the 4 locations. So go to one of their stores, say what up to Dashi, talk to him about how hot the Ottawa Senators have been, and ask him about any of the latest, greatest products that Mary J's has to offer. Check it out today, guys. It's Mary J's Dispensary.
Now back to our chat with Scott Wheeler. Yeah, it's been tough for him at the NHL level. In the AHL, though, sparkling save percentage, getting wins. So there are some things to build on for Mads Søgaard. Now, a couple more from me, and one just coming over.
And it should be noted, not to pile on the Sens, that the Sens haven't been good in front of any of their goalies this year.
No,
so
or in lots of years past, since Craig Anderson, really, honestly.
Yeah, coming over the blue line, Andy's like, oh. So with that said, there is a new member of the North American Ottawa Senators. They've just recalled Oscar Pettersson over from Rögle. And something that you noted in your article, one, there's a great write-up of a quote from his old coach, but they just made a coaching change in Rögle, and maybe that had an impact on bringing him over. I know you've seen him at the World Juniors. He's a guy where if you're just looking at the box score against his peers, dominant goal scorer. Against men, struggles. Where is there somewhere in the middle with Oscar Pettersson? What can fans expect to see when he suits up for Belleville?
Well, I think what you can expect to see is just a super honest, hardworking, push and pop kind of player. Like that's his identity. He works hard. He's competitive. He battles for pucks. He'll finish his checks. And then offensively, the game has always been a little one-dimensional. He's a shooter. He's got a sort of natural shooting mechanics that get off of his stick quickly. He'll score some goals from the slot, that kind of thing. He'll get to rebounds. He'll be around the net. The question with Oscar was always, is that going to be enough? Is he going to be such a good forechecker, such a good worker that you can sort of project him into a bottom 6, 4th line type of role? Or are there some holes there? And by holes, I mean, it's not a super aware kid. He doesn't use he's not a creative, crafty player. It's a straight line, what you see is what you get kind of game. And I think part of it in terms of Rögle and the scoring not yet translating at the SHL is he progressed up quickly. And when you progress up quickly to the pro game, because he has all of those other pro qualities, the work ethic, the skating, gets after it, finishes his checks, then suddenly you don't end up in a scoring role right away. Whereas if he'd stayed in J20 and piled up the points, maybe you get a bit of a different look when you do get your call ups. He was playing in a 4th line depth role there. It becomes hard to produce offense. I do think the Abbott twins, who were both recently let go, they were twins from Sarnia, Ontario, who were the GM and head coach of that team, brought that team out of Hockey Allsvenskan, which is the 2nd tier in the SHL, turned them for a few years into a huge giant, one of the very best teams in the SHL, developed Moritz Seider and The kid, his name is escaping me right now. The kid out in Vancouver, the winger out in Vancouver, the Swedish winger there.
Lekaramäki?
Hoglander, Nils Hoglander.
Yeah. Okay.
So they did a really good job. Anyways, the team took a step back and they were let go recently. And I think part of his decision to come over here was sort of, they're a poor team now in the SHL again, new coaching staff that doesn't necessarily know him all that well, that kind of a thing. I think it made sense for him to come over to the AHL. And then on top of that, his game fits the North American sheet, I think, better than it fits the bigger ice surface, just because he is that sort of forechecking type. That's his identity. So I'm interested to see what he looks like. Like, he's probably going to have to start as a bottom six guy in Belleville and work his way up and prove that he can sort of put the puck in the back of the net and give them some secondary scoring. And then hopefully someday you hope that he can sort of be a fourth line option for them and make the most of an NHL call up. Like, that's the kind of player we're talking about.
Yeah, we're big fans of Oscar Pettersson and hope that his potential can blossom, especially now that he's in North America. It's going to be very interesting. Final question for me here, Scott, is two prospects that Sens fans typically kind of put together in our prospect pool is Jorian Donovan and Tomas Hamara. And ironically, they ended up playing together on a D pair with the Hamilton Bulldogs. Short sample size since Jorian Donovan was traded away shortly after. But
Brantford Bulldogs.
Ooh.
Yes, Brantford Bulldogs. Yes. Thank you for the correction there.
Michael and Laura be proud of you, Scott, for that one.
Yeah.
The Bulldogs have had, it seems like they've had a lot of
the
names,
arena.
so I guess
sounds like the arena, not to get sidetracked, but sounds like the arena in Hamilton, when they're done their renovations, is going to be sort of a big facelift. So
I hope so. That town definitely can support a hockey team, hopefully. But with Tomas Hamara, that's a guy that you were really high on when the Ottawa Senators drafted him. I was high on him as well. I agreed with a lot of your kind of insight on him, but you've got him down at 14th out of 15th on the Sens list here. Now, I really thought, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, I thought his third World Juniors, which not a lot of players get to go to 3 of them, but his third one was a much improved performance over his first 2. And the trade from Kitchener, you know, when you're a guy like Hamara, kind of seems like a big time move to try to get a trade orchestrated in the OHL, but it paid dividends for him. He's really turned things around. So my question is, with these two defensemen, Donovan and Hamara, like, where has that separation happened that's given Donovan the edge here?
Yeah, it's interesting. Specifically on Hamara, I as you mentioned, liked him as in his U18 season. He was really good really impressive at U18 Worlds, like playing 25, 30 minutes a night for the Czech team at U18 Worlds in Germany. Was a standout in that tournament, was really good domestically back home. Then he comes over. He's supposed to be a leading guy on a Kitchener team. They are also simultaneously bringing in Brustevich. I remember a conversation I had with them during training camp of their first year. Brustevich is new. Hamara is new. They're experimenting with both of them on the first power play there in Kitchener. And they had said right away, we think Hamara's played better and he's going to start on the power play, but it's going to be Brustevich's job eventually. And I think when that happened, you could just see it in the way that he was playing. He became a second power play guy there. He became kind of a second pairing usage. You never want to see a good prospect playing 16, 17 minutes a night in the OHL. You'd like to see him playing 20 plus minutes a night. And it just kind of got away from him in Kitchener, where he wasn't a focal point of the offense or the power play. He isn't a really big time penalty killer at that level. And suddenly he's just a good, even strength defenseman. And you just want to see him in a bigger role. So now he goes to Brantford. He gets that role. They're in a kind of transitional state where they're unloading after contending over the last couple of years. They won an OHL championship in Hamilton before the move to Brantford. They trade away Jorian Donovan, who joined Saginaw, and suddenly there's just opportunity for Hamara, which is what all he probably cared about at that point. I think he was less concerned with winning in the OHL and more concerned with being on a team where he could play a lot. And he's looked like himself again. When he was drafted, I thought, here's a kid who might become sort of a modern style third pairing defenseman. He doesn't have the size, not sort of dynamic quality offensively, but he skates well, really smart, makes good decisions on the ice. And then it just sort of got away from him. We're starting to see it more now. I'll be interested to see whether they bring him into the fold or just let him sort of test free agency, that kind of a thing. I don't believe they've signed, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe they've signed him yet.
No, they did sign him.
They
right?
signed him right. They signed him right away.
He was the first guy to get
Okay,
signed
well
up
then
that draft class.
he's going to get an opportunity to play in Belleville then. So, yeah, he's kind of at the point in his career, had he not been signed, where I wonder whether they would have signed him, kind of thing. Interesting though. No, he's, I don't know. I'm starting to worry about what he is like. I think he'll be the player in the AHL that I thought he had a chance to be in the NHL, but I'm not sure if there's enough quality or upside there to ever get to the NHL at this point. Donovan's an interesting one. Donovan's a kid who I saw play. I don't know whether it was sample size bias or what, but I saw him play in his draft year some of the worst games that I've seen a player that age who was kind of viewed to be a mid-round pick play. Like, he just did not look like a prospect to me. He even, including in the CHL Top Prospects game that year, where he was, and other scouts would tell you this, he was brutal. Like, he was the worst player on the ice. He got exposed for a few goals and that kind of a thing. But it's sort of slowly come. He's kind of a heavier kid. Like, you see him and he doesn't really look like a sort of NHL player per se. Like, he carries a little bit of weight around, but he's worked on his fitness and his frame, and the rest of his game has sort of come along. And now suddenly he's a kid with good size, and he's got good numbers and a decent statistical profile in the OHL. And he's been a big time minutes guy in the OHL, and he's now playing for the Memorial Cup hosts. And we're going to get to see him on junior hockey's biggest stage. And he played at the World Juniors. I thought the World Juniors, his best game was the first one where he was running on adrenaline. Yep. And I thought after that, he actually had a bit of a tough go of it. But the World Juniors were never supposed to be really in the cards for him this year until injuries struck that Canadian World Junior team. So an interesting one. I know he had a really good camp. I heard from people in Ottawa that they were really happy with his training camp this year, which is positive. And he now looks like what you'd sort of hope for out of a kid who was drafted where he was, which is he's gonna come in and play in the AHL, and maybe he'll be a guy for you. And I don't think you're hoping for anything more than a third pairing guy out of Donovan. But if he can become a guy, that's a nice story for a team that, in terms of the prospect pool, needs a couple of depth guys to emerge from this group.
And you talk about fitness. I mean, his old man's a part of the player development program in Ottawa and had a great NHL career. And Sean Donovan, first ever guest on Locked On Senators. But his change of Saginaw has been great. 7 points in 9 games, plus 13, playing on a better team. So we hope to see more from Jorian Donovan going forward. Loki can chuck them too. He's been in a few fights where he's got the better of his opposition there.
He's a strong kid.
Yeah. Final question for me on the prospect pool, Scott. And I know you mentioned you want to talk about Stephen Halliday, all-time leading scorer for Dubuque in the USHL, goes to college. I know he's a bit older than your freshman. He goes over a point per game this year, doubles down. We call him a disher on this show, loves to get his teammates involved. I'll tell you the backstory on this one. A little friend of the show talk. Pillsy was talking about his goal scoring prowess. He goes, because you don't pass the puck a whole lot. And Halliday looked at him like, I had 60 assists last year. I think I can pass the puck. So he's a disher. He's over a point per game now in his sophomore season as well. Like, does this kid have a real shot?
I think so. I think he was 6th or 7th on I don't have my list in front of me. He's 6th or 7th on it, but the kind of kid where I debated sort of 3, 4, 5, I think you could reasonably rank him there at this point. He's had a really nice run in college hockey. The piece with him is he's a big kid, and I hate, you guys know this, I hate the term hockey IQ because I don't think it actually really tells the audience or the reader what you mean. But there's just something about him and the way he thinks the game and processes the game and reads play, especially offensively, especially as a passer. It's at a very high level. I know the management staff in Dubuque really well, and I've picked their brains on him over the years. They speak very highly of both the kid and of that sort of on-ice intelligence piece, which can be hard to describe. But he understands offense and how to make plays. And if at that size, he's also got decent size. Suddenly you've got an interesting player. He does remind me, I think I mentioned this in his report, he reminds me of a kid named Jack Dugan, who was a disher in the true ascension college hockey, sort of anywhere from 30 to 50 points, was well above a point per game, one of the most productive players in college hockey, bigger kid, pass first guy. And it never really clicked for him in the AHL and ECHL. And he had a tough time making the jump. Like I think he'd hoped, and like the Golden Knights had probably hoped when they signed him out of college. So I do wonder whether there's a little bit of that. Steven's not the fastest kid. The goal scoring's never going to be there. can you be a pass first complementary middle six guy? That's got to be his end game. That's got to be his goal. And that's got to be what the hopes or what the Sens are hoping for out of him. But the intelligence is obviously very high end. Like, he just gets it offensively with the puck on his stick in terms of reading the ice and finding guys. So, can that carry him? Maybe. And if it does, that would be a nice boost for the Sens.
Yeah, Stephen Halliday, a recurring guest on this show. He's awesome guy, and we hope that he's a guy who can step out of college and at least make waves in Belleville to start and take it from there. Speaking of recurring guests, great guy, Scott Wheeler. Make sure you're following him on social media. Scott C. Wheeler, over 4,000 words on the Sens prospect pool, and that includes quotes from coaches and scouts alike. So make sure you're subscribed to The Athletic. Between Scott and Ian Mendez, I mean, it's a Sens fan's dream to get all that. One of the other things Scott brought out was the 2024 midseason ranking. So stay tuned next week on Locked On Senators. We're going to get into that with him. Now, maybe a little preview, Scott. Final question. Is there one position that the Senators should focus on in this upcoming draft, or is it just BPA and away you go?
I think it would be incumbent on them if they're in that sort of top 10 range, where I think at this point we expect them to land. There are 6 legit defensemen in this draft. 12. Really have a top 12 in this draft and a clear 6. I think you got to go, if you're the Sens, you've got to look very closely at those 6D and sort of consider that as your route. They've got an established core with Tkachuk and Stützle and Norris and Batherson, and Greg's joined that group. Pinto's joined that group. I know Sanderson's obviously a huge piece of the puzzle, and they've got decisions to make on Jacob Chychrun and what they're going to do with their D moving forward. But if they could add another piece of the quality of Sanderson, I think there is a couple in this draft that could really move the needle for them over the next few years.
Well, we'll discuss that next week. Stay tuned for that. Scott, appreciate your time as always, and keep up the great work on The Athletic. Even though we are Locked On Senators, we're so invested in what you're doing there. We're reading all 32 of those, and we'd appreciate if everyone else would go to The Athletic and support their great journalism there. So thanks for doing this, Scott.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Millsy. First, a shout out to Scott Wheeler. This guy's tireless work ethic, enough so that he's going to join us again next week to talk about the 2024 NHL draft. Millsy, give us a little hint. Will we feel better knowing that the Senators are going to add 2 first-round picks, at least, out of the players that we discussed with Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. You'll feel better. And quick, I just want to echo your statement. Scott Wheeler, absolute legend when it comes to scouting. All of his work at The Athletic is must-read stuff. I love especially when he dives in on certain prospects and you get to kind of see the backstory of their upbringing and their journey. And he talks to the families and stuff like that. That's always fascinating for me. So make sure, if you're not already with The Athletic, Ross, you're going to want to sign up for The Athletic, because not only do you get to read the great works of Scott Wheeler, but you cannot be missing Ian Mendez's articles. So we're going to have Scott Wheeler back on the show next week and Ian Mendez on the show next week. So it's a big time Athletic Locked On Senators podcast combo here. We love to see it.
Well, as we're getting on the Peloton, you and I, it's an Athletic week for us overall.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So any final thoughts as we head into the weekend? Full disclosure, we're recording this Thursday afternoon. So if there has been an update on Jake Sanderson, we will get you that information on Twitter at Sens Central. Like I said off the top, doubt it's going to come before next Thursday. Hopefully he's just on the ice, no worse for wear, and we can exhale, deep breath, knowing that the Senators' best overall defenseman is ready to rock and roll. If you missed any of our content this week, you can check that out on YouTube. We also just put out a fun Patreon video. Patreon, just $5 a month. You can go check that out. We did an all-star style draft, but just with Ottawa Senators, with a little wrinkle in there as well. Wherever Brady Tkachuk got drafted at last night's draft, it was too low.
Agreed. Yeah, should have went 1-1. Although this is Back to the Future here. I'm going to say the Quinn or the Hughes are going to draft Brady Tkachuk. So let it be known. And when it happens, credit to me.
Okay.
Final thoughts for me, Ross, is to get my itch of Senators hockey, I'm going to try to dial into Belleville this weekend. Sure, the Ottawa Senators are off, but Belleville is playing on Friday and
Tonight.
Saturday tonight in Syracuse, both of those games. So I'm going to be tuning into those to cheer on our guy Mads. I hope that he can get some of his confidence back down in Belleville and
Pistol Pete.
And yeah, Oscar Pettersson. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if he gets into both of these games. I'm hoping he gets into at least one. We haven't heard any confirmation about that. But yeah, having friends of the show on in Belleville. And I mean, you got, Crooker, Igor, so many guys to watch down there. Tyler Boucher, K-Train. Yeah, so I haven't been able to watch Belleville as much this year as I usually do. So I'm going to try to tune in for those games.
Okay, we'll follow Brandon Pillar 1 and at Sens Central. We'll get you our thoughts on those games as they develop. It's Belleville's final 2 games before the All-Star break as well, where Angus Crookshank and Max Gannett will be representing the B-Sens in San Jose. Talk about a one-up on the NHL. The AHL All-Stars get to go to San Jose in the middle of February, and the NHLers get to go gray and muggy Toronto.
Do you think Oliver Bjorkstrand would have been stoked if he got told you're going to San Jose? I mean, he was going to San Diego, so it's San Jose. That's not far off. Maybe he wishes he was an AHL All-Star.
One's as far north in California and one's as far south, just for the one person that's going to get on you for that.
I mean, same state. If we're talking Toronto to San Jose. Yeah, I'll say San Diego much closer.
It's just like Thunder Bay and Toronto. It's all Ontario. It's all the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. For Americans that are like, yeah, Thunder Bay, Toronto, same thing.
I love it, man. Another week of laughs. Senators 6-2-2 obviously gets our vibes a little bit higher. And Scott Wheeler, thank you to him for the breakdown. Even though it's not what we wanted to hear, it's what we had to hear at this point in time. But for more, again, check us out on social media. We'll be back for a full next week. Despite no Sens hockey, we are your team. Every day we take that to heart here on LOSP. But for today, we say goodbye. For Brandon Pillar, I'm Ross Levitan. Thank you for listening. Have a great weekend. This has been another edition of the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.